Hi there. In this presentation, I want to talk about hatha yoga, which I've been practicing for probably about 40 years now. So I suppose I have a lot of experience with the ups and downs of my sadhana or practice. And hatha yoga is the yoking together of sun and moon, and literal meaning of it. And it's linked to Gnosticism in that it reveals a sort of contradiction of the fact that in the midst of matter, uh, we can find or become unified with spirit. And this seems like a contradiction in terms because Gnosticism has a duality between matter on one hand, which is irredeemable, and spirit on the other, which is part of the redemption of human consciousness, one might say. Whereas the irredeemable matter is eventually and forever cast aside. Uh, and this has quite a lot to do with the concept of God according to Judeo-Christianity, Orthodox Judeo-Christianity on one hand, and Gnosticism on the other. How I'm going to tie all these threads together, I'm not sure in this presentation, but it seemed like an easy task when I was thinking about this. Um, the concept of God, according to Orthodox Judeo-Christianity and Islam, is that God has certain qualities which have to do with its omni qualities, I might call them, and I've sort of tried to put them in with the five elements. So starting with Earth here on the bottom left hand side, um, looking at this as a sort of quadrangle of elements. So we have Earth here, and omnipresent. So wherever you are in the universe of matter, God is present, and that's pretty self-explanatory. And then omnipotent, omnipotent. That's to do with fire. God can do anything. God can suspend the laws of physics as well, and time and space, according to his will, or usually his will, but of course it's now her will as well, or its will, I suppose. And so it's the power to do anything, space and time suspension, laws of physics suspension. That's pretty omnipotent, and according to will. Um, Now, moving up to water, I have a slight tussle here. I mean, immutable love, that means that love does not change. Um, on one hand, omniscient, in the sense that God knows and cares about each sparrow that falls from the sky, according to Scripture, which is a metaphor for God's um, omniscient love. Um, and but on the other hand, omniscience refers to God's ideas that are all pervading of the universe, including the laws of physics, which he or she can suspend at will. But on the other hand, there's this idea of immutable ideas. So, especially with regard to ethics, thou shalt not murder, for example, one of the Ten Commandments, and that's going to hold true or be adhered to by God, or required by God of his angels and sentient beings, like forever. So God doesn't change. And God is everywhere, and God is all potent, almighty, and God is omniscient, or the love of God is omniscient, in reaches down and has consciousness everywhere. But I rather think that immutability probably goes with the air, which is to do with intellect. So so that's more immutability is to do with ideas in this case, and omniscient is really to do with love, love all pervading, and sort of kind of the part of God which is receptive, and the part of God which is active is omnipotent. Um, and So that's my kind of designation, and also to spirit here. I've the idea of mysterious. So God acts in mysterious ways, for example, moves in mysterious ways, and but I think that Gnostics have a problem with God being all these different qualities, because this might be true in the transcendental realm, but here on Earth, in the universe of matter at least, the empirical evidence is that God is not any of these qualities. And so from the Bible, God is mutable. God changes his mind about things. God doesn't seem to be present as love everywhere in the universe, only in some places and not others. So these are two examples, and the laws of physics seem to be all pervading, really, when you look at it empirically, despite what human beings may believe and think, and perceive as a miracle. Um, but I'm not really going to go into this because, Christianity, for example, has had 2,000 years of theological discussion, an argument both within itself and with detractors from Christianity or from so-called heretics. So they have pretty much an answer for everything. And, better minds than mine wrestled with these ideas and these qualities that God is supposed to have. And pretty much they can defend them with all the strength of argument at their disposal. But Gnostics don't believe in this. Gnostics believe that, believe in two gods for a start, and the transcendental God is not omnipotent over the demiurge. So the demiurge is omnipotent, perhaps, within the universe of matter, and the transcendental God is omnipotent within the transcendental sphere, but never the twain shall meet, except through the human being and through the operation of Jesus, the Avatar, the Christ, and through the Holy Spirit. So perhaps these two worlds, which will be completely separate, meet within those two, within that framework. But Jesus, for example, certainly changed his mind about things, and his love was not omniscient for example, towards the money changers. And of course, he didn't know they were going to crucify him until the very end. So you can't say omniscience really. And if God is the same as Jesus, is the same stuff as God, according to Nicaea Creed, then it follows that God can't be omniscient or omnipotent if Jesus wasn't. But anyway, but as I said, a lot of cans of worms are opened up, which Christians have already dealt with, going back centuries, really. So, but it's just that Gnosticism has a particular singular way of looking at the universe, which is dualistic. But on the other hand, you start off here, soul, and the journey of soul, represented by this sort of U shape, starting off with innocence and ending up with knowledge, starting off with unity with God and ending up with separation. So as you go down into the lower worlds, as soul moves into the lower worlds, it becomes more and more separated from spirit, and more knowledgeable of everything that is in the lower worlds, and it needs to then ascend to spirit again, but this time it has knowledge. The soul has knowledge of good and evil, knowledge of all the contradictions of matter, of this physical universe, pragmatism versus idealism, and law of necessity versus ethical law or ethical principle. And it's seen that, and it looks for forgiveness for all the things it has had to do. There's the idea of ethical dilemma, and necessity sometimes overriding ethical principle. So soul has had to cope with these terrible decisions that the conscious mind of the brain that houses soul has had to face, and had to suffer over, both as victim and perpetrator. So then there's the return, but there's knowledge because God doesn't have omniscience, but soul, as it were, brings God into a state of omniscience because God didn't know what it was like to live in matter until human descended, or souls descended into matter, and B, the Christ descended into matter, and the Logos became spirit, and knowledge of what it's like to be human was sort of transmitted, if that's the word, back to God, so that God grows in knowledge as a result of the fall and as a result of Christ's mission and crucifixion. But then again, Gnostics don't believe that Jesus was crucified in the flesh, but only had the appearance of flesh upon the cross, and it wasn't actually present in matter. But anyway, be that as it may, certainly the return to a state of knowledge underpins the complete narrative of the human condition, narrative of our evolution, our devolution and our evolution, back to innocence again. And we will have knowledge of what it's like to be a human, but we shall have again our innocence through divine mercy and divine forgiveness. So we will know what it is like to sin, but we should be forgiven for our sins. Whereas before we didn't know what it was like to sin, we were innocent. We had to lose that innocence in order to regain complete knowledge. So we had incomplete knowledge before, and now we have complete knowledge. So it's not exactly ignorance, which would be an antonym of knowledge. It's really innocence versus experience. That's kind of the main thing. But I've called it knowledge versus innocence. Anyway, what has this to do with yoga? Well, yoga basically is, or hatha yoga, which is the physical yoga, is where you go deeply into matter, and you go deeply into matter by employing three basic principles. One is the controlled stretch, whereby the skin is stretched over the tendons and muscles and ligaments very gradually, very carefully, which allows a flow of prana, or life energy, from one point of the body to another. Secondly, you have the idea of tension and release, the bandha, or bondage, and then release from bondage. So you go in you go into a kind of you go into a posture, which can very often be a kind of represent a tension, a holding, and then you release from that tension, and that kind of makes energy spill over from one point to another. It spills over, and that combined with a careful stretch um, creates a movement of prana, and we'll come to prana in a minute. And finally, the third is the breath. All this is done within the compass of the breath. So you would breathe in, and there would be tension, and then you would breathe out, and there would be relaxation. But sometimes also breathing out to go into tension, and as well happens as part of the sort of breath cycle. Um, there are many different types of yoga breath, by the way. So it's a highly complex science, in fact, of creating various breath cycles and observing their effects. And there are many, many different yoga postures, each of which has an effect on the body, which can be observed to very great detail. Um, so basically, the yogi, or the person who practices yoga, goes very much into the midst of matter, the midst of the breath cycle, and into the midst of stretching, in the midst of tension and release. And through the insights and observations made during yoga practice, um, a great deal of self-knowledge can occur as well, or can be cultivated. And particularly in the observation of prana, which is like the energy before breath. Pra means before, and na means breath. So there's an energy before there was breath in the universe. There was the energy that was going to cause breath to happen in this kind of theory or theology or cosmology even. And this is going to the observation and the study of prana and its movement over the body in a controlled way, or in an aware way rather, is part of insight, or the gaining of insight into the operation of matter as it applies to the human body, the physique. And I mean, this is just a very brief explanation of what is an incredibly complex science, in fact, the science of yoga, and science of hatha yoga. And it's also like you observe duality, you observe the active sun, and you observe the passive moon, and sometimes the moon is active and the sun is passive as well. So you observe the duality, you observe the binary system of this universe. And so, in a way, your consciousness goes into the midst of matter, descends into matter, and receives knowledge about a matter as a result of yoga. So I suppose this ties in, obviously, with modern Gnosticism. It's got nothing to do with classical Gnosticism, as it were. Um, and But sometimes also people say that as a result of yoga, you can cleanse the various vehicles of your psyche to such an extent that you open yourself up to gnosis, to special knowledge, which comes in, and you can experience um, separate unity, well, reunification with deity as a result of the insights that you gain through the body and breath and the interplay between them. So it seems on the face of it to be quite simple and quite possible. Because in reality, it's incredibly difficult, incredibly challenging, and incredibly subtle. So that siddha, or success, or in magic, as far as yoga is concerned, is incredibly subtle. We're not in Harry Potter country here. If magical things happen, they happen over a very long time, and very subtly, so subtly that you often don't notice changes which occur in accordance with will. And that's part of it really, because in the physical world, change is quite dramatic usually, um, and but in this case, it's like looking at I don't know, looking at the progress of the aeons of geological aeons. It can take all your life, really, before certain things are observed and certain conclusions are come to as a result of yoga practice. And I've practiced yoga, as I say, on and off, sometimes very intensely, and sometimes very relaxedly, following the dictates of mind and body, and of life situation as well, because sometimes life has a way of making your practice very difficult and challenging, and other times it makes it very easy. And I've had both over the years, the decades, because of particular personal problems and life situations, and and the difficult parts of life and the easy parts of life really come to the same thing. And the distractions of life are as much part of the gaining of special knowledge of gnosis as the easy parts are. So it makes no difference, really, the conditions of practice, whether they're good, optimum conditions, or whether they're bad conditions. It's still always yoga. It's just that the insight that you may gain from yoga practice may be very, very slight if conditions are not optimum. Whereas if they are, then you can observe quite a lot of things happening, which you didn't before, and fairly quickly as well. I say fairly quickly, but not particularly quickly. Um, with magic and yoga and the results of yoga practice or magical practice, if you imagine a very, very, very high wall, which you can't get over, and a very, very wide wall which you can't go round, and a very, very a wall which goes deep into the earth, which you can't burrow under, and a wall that is incredibly thick, so that you can't blow it up and put a hole through it. It's impossible. Somewhere there is a little yellow door, a very small yellow door, covered in ivy. And it would take you a long time to find that door. And sometimes it's so small it looks like you can't go through it. But that little door is the way through this wall, way past this huge obstacle, and the wall represents the demiurge and his agents and the physical universe, and the yellow door represents success in yoga, or success in meditation or in prayer, or indeed the receiving of special knowledge of gnosis spontaneously, which of course is the creme de la creme of gnosis, which can happen to anybody doing anything, and not necessarily looking for anything. It can happen to people, ordinary people, and what they do with that gnosis is up to them, of course, according to their life situation. But it can certainly happen to anyone. And you find yourself going through that yellow door, and finding a way through past all the obstacles. Of course, that door might be a temporary one, and very often it proves to be temporary. And that's okay as well, because you take the remembrance of gnosis, and you live your life according to the remembrance of that moment of gnosis, and you take that with you through the whole of your life, hopefully. But distractions are very easy. The demiurge, the demiurge finds it incredibly easy to distract the consciousness of sentient beings, obviously through fear and scarcity and threat. So you are the same. It'll be very easy for the world to trip you up. And that's something you have to accept, I think, really. And it's very easy to be distracted during yoga practice, and very easy to be distracted by poor yoga practice. Um, but if it's poor or not, it's still yoga, whatever it is, and it still will bring you into insight, into the very, very fundamental workings of matter as far as they apply to your body. So I don't really know if I have linked all the different elements of this presentation together, actually, ironically enough. Um, and if I haven't, I suppose I've just been on a sort of ramble around, you know, my favourite subjects. Um, and yoga has always been with me, but I do find it hard to talk about it. I also find that talking about yoga can actually distract you from practice. It may be that today I won't do a very good practice at all because I've been talking about yoga, whereas I should be keeping silent about it, really, for the best results. But sometimes it's necessary to tell people about, you know, about yoga practice, if only to tell them to keep at it, and to keep practicing no matter what, and to observe the change in practice over the years, its ups and downs, its sort of, you know, its waveform, if you like, and that's fascinating to watch it all. But of course, you will become frustrated and go into fury even with yoga, as you will with religion, and as you will with God. To put it like that as well, because fury and frustration are part of the F demons that that we cannot escape from in this world. And uh, yes, keep at it, definitely, or keep at any sort of meditation that you might do. And you know, like any kind of athletic, you know, it takes practice. Practice makes perfect, and perfect makes knowledge, and perfect will become knowledge in the end, which will, and that knowledge um, will make us stronger as we return to the unity of soul and spirit.